Delighted to be talking with Mr. Jim Fern. Jim, you were saying?
Yeah, I know. I was just saying, I never thought of, I grew up in love with Charlie Brown, Snoopy, Peanuts, right?
Hmm.
Reading the newspaper strip. Man, it was a big thing for me as a kid to go down to the like 2 blocks away where I grew up in. I grew up in New York, Long Island, New York, and I lived 2 blocks away from the train station. You had everything around. I'd get my comics at the drugstore that had every comic book, right? And
Hmm.
I'd go to the bakery on Sundays, and right next to the bakery was a well, it was an eatery, and even in the eatery, it was a little diner by the railroad station, and even in there, it had the comic books and the newspapers, right?
Hmm.
So and our neighbor's son owned that eatery, so I'd go to the deli on Sunday to get the fresh baked rolls that me and my mom had. I never knew my dad, so my mom raised me. Two older
Hmm.
sisters, but they were out of the house. And then I couldn't wait to get the bread to go get the daily newspaper, the Sunday newspaper, and wrapped over was the comics section. And back
Uh-huh.
then the comics were big, and the Peanuts was the first thing you'd see. It would fold over, this way, right? So Peanuts would be the first thing, and that was like the biggest thrill for me as a kid. And I never thought of that as a profession, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you see it, you read it. I knew who Charles Schulz was as a little kid. You never think of it as a job, like a money making career or profession. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and then little did I know I'd wind up in it. I had no clue. So
Yeah.
I don't know what got
Here you
I don't
are.
know what got me on that, but yeah.
Here you are at the drawing table, and you said this is the place where sometimes you also fall asleep from time to time.
Uh-huh.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. It amazes my sister. I'm not married. I've been single. I love women, but I just never got married,
Hmm.
and just have dogs. But my sister, I spent a lot of time with my sister. I'm in Florida now, and my I have two sisters, older sisters, and one of them. I keep looking at myself in the camera. I'm like, I don't want to be. How am I centered? Okay. So
It looks great. It looks great.
I think I have one sister just the next street up. So we go every now and then. We go out and take a trip, and I'm always at the drawing board, and I sleep at all different hours, and I never know when I'm going to need to nod off. And I
Hmm.
could sit in the passenger seat of the car like this and just go to sleep. And that always amazes my sister. I used to go into New York City, do a deadline, right? I literally would sleep, 3 days a week, maybe.
Hmm.
And I would go into the city, be on the train, and I just sit in the train like that. And I right here now at the drawing board, I'll just like I'll lean my head down, or I'll just sit like this and just conk out for a solid 10, 15 minutes,
Yeah.
and wake up refreshed like that.
Cat napping. It's is that part of the secret of your success and work and those boxes of comics that are behind you?
Yeah, every time I take a nap and wake up, there's another box. I don't know how I got there. They just show up. They multiply on their own,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
dust, like the dust in the place. Yeah, no, the secret is anchoring yourself here, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
I when I started in the comic books, I had many. One of your questions was like my journey, the support, right?
Hmm.
And it was a multi-leveled journey. Like I said, I never expected it. So I'll give you a brief rundown.
Hmm.
My uncle, I'm Catholic. My uncle used to usher in church down in Virginia. Now I'm up in New York, and he ushered with one of my favorite comic strips in the newspaper was Croc. You ever see
Hmm.
Croc? It's like
It sounds familiar.
BC and the Wizard of Id. You ever seen that?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
They're still well Croc. There was like a group of guys who were friends, and Croc was started by my friend Bill Reckon, who I'm talking about, and Brad Parker, who did the Wizard of Id. So that was one of my favorite strips. It was Wizard of Id, BC, and Croc. And I never cut out the strips. So I would save the whole paper. I would never cut them out. So I cut out this one, and I kept it in my little book as a young teenager of this one Croc panel. And little did I know that my uncle was friends with that guy, Bill Reckon, who did Croc. I had no idea. So my uncle kept an eye out on my drawing because he wanted to be a cartoonist too. But then World War II hit, and he
Hmm.
wound up being a career pilot. You know, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. My uncle
Hmm.
Frank, my mom's older brother, and he kept an eye out on my drawing. You know, the drawing thing runs in the family, and he wound up showing Bill Reckon, who they were friends down there in Virginia, my work. And then when my uncle thought my work was mature enough, he introduced me to Bill Reckon. I would go down for a summer visit. I was 15 years old, and
That's
I was
cool.
like, yeah, I was like Bill Reckon, you know, who did Croc. I said, well, you got to be kidding me. So he said, you're good enough now. I can get you a job, you know,
Hmm.
with my friend Mike Roy. And I was like, "You mean I could actually make money doing this? You know, this is a job." I had no clue. So as a kid, we grew up poor. You know, I would do everything, rake leaves and whatever I could for money. And I thought drawing for money, you know, how great would that be? So,
Hmm.
so I was 15. I didn't yet hit 10th grade. It was like the summer before I was to enter 10th grade. So I'm thinking, man, if I'm good enough now, and I could make money. I said, shoot. So I started drawing this portfolio thing to send in to DC Comics. I was more of a Superman, Batman fan, you know,
Hmm.
than I
Hmm.
was,
Hmm.
and then Spider Man. But I like DC Comics. So I drew this whole entourage of everybody: Captain America, Superman, Wonder Woman. It didn't matter on this poster board, and I mailed it in. And so me being local to DC Comics, they were like in the city, which is like 56 miles away. I mail it in. The next day, I get a phone call from DC Comics. You know, I'm 15 years old, and the phone rings, and my mom picks it up and says, "Jimmy, it's DC Comics." I go, what? So I pick up the phone. It was Ernie Cologne, and
Uh-huh.
they had a book called New Talent Showcase. So you know, my supporters were my uncle Frank, Bill Reckon, Ernie Cologne, who like he tried to tutor me. I go in there, you know, to do this, you have to almost be an architect, and you have to know anatomy, and you have to know so many different levels. You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
I was a doodler as a kid, and this takes you to a whole different level. You know, it's people think, oh, you draw comic books, isn't that fun? You know, it's a no, this is work. This is serious work.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
so I did this portfolio thing, and I sent it in. Ernie Cologne said, come on in. So I went in. My mom escorted me. I'm 15. We take the train. 75 Rockefeller Plaza, New York City.
Hmm. Hmm.
And man, you talk about like nerves, and then like a combination of happiness and nervousness and the whole bit. And we go in, and it was the offices were so corporate, you know, but then there was all this artwork on the wall and everything. So he's looking at my work, and Marv Wolfman was sitting behind Ernie Cologne. It was like this very narrow office space. I think there were 6 desks, and they were in the back by the window. And man, I'm enthralled. That was the first time I saw original artwork. Right?
Hmm.
Marv Wolfman was editing these pages. He had like a pile of original pages, and on the top it was Superman, and I know it was inked by Klaus Janson. I'm looking at that, going, I was just mesmerized. So Ernie Cologne's going over my work, and he says, "You're good, but you know, they don't feel like they're on the floor, that type of thing." So he
Hmm.
says, do you know perspective?" And I looked at him blankly, and he says, "You don't know perspective." Huh?" I didn't even know what that word was, perspective. You know, I'm 15 years old. I used to doodle, right? I said, "No." So I went in about 2 other times. He was trying to coach me,
Oh
and then,
yeah.
and I'm 15. And he says, "Oh," he says, "No." He says, work on that, and then come back when you have the perspective down." So it was a multi-level process. So I finally get my first job. This was 1980. So now we fast forward to 1983. I'm surpassing working with Mike Roy, going down to Bill Reckon, going to Virginia. My first job was with Mike Roy down in Virginia from New York. I moved in with my uncle. My mom stayed in New York. And Mike Roy, if you look up Mike Roy, he did a lot of things. He had a comic strip called Angel. He drew the newspaper strip The Saint and Nero Wolf, and
Hmm.
he did House of Secrets work. You know, I mean, you know, he goes way back. He knew Rex Stout. You're a history guy. I hope a lot of the people who watch this know these names, but like
Yeah, yeah.
Leslie Charteris, The Saint. He was friends with Mickey Spillane. Mike
Wow.
Roy. Yeah, Mike Roy. So Mike Roy, I go to work with him, and my first day on the job, he picks me up and he takes me into Washington D.C. and he's got a 45-foot houseboat.
Mm.
That was his studio. So my first job was inking background in the comics was inking backgrounds on a 45-foot houseboat. Right? I mean,
Oh
how
wow.
fun was that?
Yeah.
And you know, and I was good, but the work for him dried up with the comic books. We did Buck Rogers in the 21st century, 25th century, and it dried up. I did some other side projects with him. Went back to New York to nothing. There was nothing up in New York, nothing back home. So I pushed hard. So I had already had a relationship with New Talent Showcase with Ernie Colon.
Mm.
Sal Almondola took that over. Pushed hard with him. Went to see him. He said to me, "You're too young." I was 17 at the time. "You're too young. You don't know the dynamics and this and that." And I'm like, "Ooh." So I Bill Reckon was good friends with Sal Buscema. You know who Sal Buscema is?
Absolutely. Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, little did I know his brother John lived near me too. So
Oh,
that's
cool.
so you see what I mean about my digression. You only got 20 minutes, but just the one
You're
question
good.
alone, we could do the 20 minutes. So my supporters were these people. So we get so I come back to New York and I call Bill Rick and I said, Bill, there's nothing up here. I started working at a mail factory with my one sister. I'm doing Publishers Clearinghouse, putting them in a mail bag to deliver. I did, so I want to get back into the art. I started doing portraits.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I do portraits in mall, and I in the mall, and I called Bill Rick, and I said I got nothing going on. He said, well, he said let me get in touch with you. Let me get you in touch with Sal Buscema. And I'm like, Sal Buscema. I said, holy mackerel, who lived down in Springfield. So I sent Sal a package, and Sal said, you're good enough to be an inker. He said, I don't know about penciling, the whole perspective and people being in the. I had everybody floating. And it's a whole other mental dynamic to keep to to weigh people down as you're drawing them, make it look like they're sitting in a chair or
Hmm.
standing on the floor. It's like an understanding of gravity that you have to obtain through knowing perspective and everything. It's mind-boggling when I think about it, and it's only drawing, right? You would think I'd be curing cancer, but this stuff is mind-boggling. If you don't instinctively know it, you have to really learn it. So that's what I mean
Yeah.
about being chained here. You got to learn it. So I sent Sal Buscema a package, and he goes, "Yeah, you can be an inker." He says, "I think you're that good." He said, "I'll set you up to meet Ralph Macchio up at Marvel." Ralph
Wow.
Macchio was an editor for I don't know what books, but I know he did this. He was a writer for one of my favorite stories in Bizarre Adventures. Do you remember Bizarre Adventures? They
I
had the big
do.
black and
Uh-huh.
white, the big size books like Epic Magazine or Heavy Metal. So I went in with Ralph Macchio, and he just had me sit there. He was real nice to me. And Bob Harris, who wound up being, editor in chief of Marvel, was his assistant editor. Bob Harris would just sit and stare at me, and in comes this guy Jack Morelli, who was an in-house letterer, and he
Mm.
had these pages. Now I'm new to like original art and the process, so he had these pages that had they were inked. They didn't have the background done, and they had like pea soup stains on them.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was literally like a green stain of something. And I forget who the penciler was, but the inker was Vinnie Coletta. And Jack Morelli comes in, Ralph Magazine. He says, nobody wants to do these backgrounds because of this junk that's on the paper. It's like nobody wants to touch this. And Ralph Macchio looks at me and says, "Hey Jim, do you think you can ink these backgrounds?" And I said, "Yeah." So I take the backgrounds with the pea soup. I go home. Now, meanwhile, I'm 17. I don't have a car. I'm taking the train, and I take this stuff home, and I'm trying to flatten out the page because it's kind of warped from the. And I ink it, and I go in the next day, 4 pages I think, and I go in the next day, and he was like, "Wow, these." Macchio goes, "This looks good." Not to be confused with the actor Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid.
Hmm. Hmm.
Same spelling. He goes, "These look good," and the assistant editor Denny O'Neill came in. Her name was Linda Grant, and there was another guy. I don't remember his name, but he was one of the older guys from Marvel. Sit there with a cigar, and we're discussing my work. And then I had some of my ink samples and I pulled them out. And this Linda Grant from Denny O'Neill's office said, I like you. And the guy on the chair goes, so who do you ink like? Terry Austin, Carl Potts? Who do you think you
Mhm.
are? He goes, who do you think you are? I said, I think I'm Jim Fern. And Linda
I
Grant,
like it.
Linda, yeah, and I'm only 17. And Linda Grant says, she liked the answer. And she goes, I think I have something for you to do. She knew it would be my first job. So it
Yeah.
was a 6-page Moon Knight story, all right?
Yeah.
Penciled by Bill Reinhold. Mike Carlin wrote it. Mike Carlin, who became like a big Superman editor over DC Comics.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
Mike Carlin wrote it. I bring it, and the whole thing was I would do it right away, right? I bring it home. I bring it. I mean, it was. I've never seen pencil pages before with the lettering on it, right? That was like a whole romantic thing. I mean, you buy a when you buy a comic, today a lot of stuff is digital, but it's like opening baseball cards, like a pack of baseball cards, and you
Hmm.
smell the bubble gum and the fresh cardboard and everything. There's like a Garrison Keeler mentions that when he was a kid, when he was going to buy the new pencils and the new notebooks, the palpable smell and feel,
Uh-huh.
like buying a newspaper. There's something to it, right? There's an ambiance there. Was it so when I looked at these, so I didn't take them home. She mailed me that, so I got this package with the 6-page Moon Knight job to ink, and it had my name on this sticker with a John Romita Senior Spider-Man swinging in the corner. That was their logo for. And it was like, wow, this was so Marvel official. And I opened the package, and I was actually 18 at this time. And there's these pencil pages on you know, these pages. I don't even have a page in front of me, but like this paper, and it was lettered, right? So you got the black lettering, the letter right on the artwork, and you got the gray tone pencil underneath. It was like that, like opening up your first pack of baseball cards or getting the
Love
news.
that.
It was like a wonderful ambiance. I call that the romance, right? The romance of the work. And
Hmm.
I looked at this and I said, now how do I do this? I had
Hmm.
no clue, absolutely no clue. I didn't know anything about what ink to use, none of it. I don't know. I had a little idea. I did the backgrounds, but like what pen nibs, what brushes, I had no clue. So I went over to the local comic shop, and the guy who was always behind the counters, they're a little bit older than me, maybe my same age as me. His name was Jim also. Jim Foel, Phoel. And we connected after all these years on Facebook. But so I go in there, and there was a guy talking to him. The guy, I remember that he had one of those cabbie caps, those flat caps,
Hmm.
and he
Hmm.
had a members only type of jacket. And he introduced himself. He says, hey, I'm Don Heck. I came in just as he came in. He goes, I'm Don Heck. I'm here to check the place out. You're having me a guest this Saturday. Now, do you know who Don Heck is?
I do know
Don.
that name. I do know
So
that name.
so Don Heck he's one of the 4 original Marvel comic artists.
Hmm.
He was the
Hmm.
first artist on Iron Man.
Uh,
He created from scratch like a handful of the Avengers, like Silver Streak, Scarlet Witch, Hawkeye. He created Hawkeye, and I knew who he was. And I walk in right behind him. I had no idea he lived right near me. So I go, "You're Don." After he introduces himself, makes nice with Jim behind the counter. I go, "You're Don Heck?" And he goes, "Yeah, hi, how are you?" I said, "Yeah, hey, I'm Jim, blah blah blah." I got my first job from Marvel Comics. Oh, I had the whole package with the Marvel sticker with my name on it and the Spider-Man. I'm going to bring it to show Jim Fowle at the shop. And here's Don Heck. I'm like, of all the luck in the world, right?
yeah. Yeah.
So so I pull the pages out and I go, Don. I said, I never called him Don. I called him Mr. Heck. And then he got irritated with that. He said, just call me Don. I said, well, how about Mr. Don? So I called him Mr. Don. I knew him for 11 years up until the day he died, and I called him Mr. Don the whole time. Sort of like that Elvis Presley thing where he was always saying, yes, sir, yes, sir. That's the way I was. So I said, I just got this job for Marvel, my first job. Now, in his brain, later on, I found that he's thinking, what does this punk kid do with a job at Marvel Comics? So I showed it to him. I said, I'm supposed to ink this. I don't know what to do. What do I do? And he said, well, you do this, that, and the other thing. And so we parted company. I go home, and I'm still choking. Like I pull him out. I'm at the drum board, And I said, son of a gun, I have no idea what to do. I was so scared. So I go in the phone book. I look up Don Heck in the phone book. Boom, there he is. I give him a call. I said, hey, do you remember me? We just met. He goes, yeah, yeah, yeah. I said, I still don't know where to start. He said, well, he says, I won't, he says, I got some time, not a whole lot of time. Why don't you come over and I'll show you what to do? And I
Oh
said,
wow.
yeah. I said, okay, great. I won't take up too much of your time. We became friends for 11 years from that day on until he
Wow.
passed away. But I got to learn all the little implements, the tools, the brushes, sitting at the drawing board. Like I won't say he was my mentor because I drew really well. I was good at drawing, but
Hmm.
doing the books, he was a role model. He showed me the ropes, the
Hmm.
fundamentals. So Don Heck, that was my string of support, right? I
That's
mean,
awesome.
you can't get any better than that.